She lifted the baby from the crib, and the diaper felt wrong. Too light, too dry, 24 hours, and not a single wet diaper from either twin. She knew something was wrong, but the nurses said it was normal. The pediatrician said, "Give it time." But Camila had raised 6 children in Panama, and she knew what dying looked like. It was 3 a.m. when she made the decision that would either save 2 lives or destroy her own. She opened the diaper, looked inside, and what she found made her blood run cold. Because this wasn't dehydration, this was something far worse. And the people paid to protect these babies had missed it completely. Before we continue, please hit subscribe, like this video, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I believe this story found you today for a reason. Richard Hargrave stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, staring at a city he owned pieces of but couldn't feel. 46 years old, self-made billionaire, tech empire that stretched across 4 continents, and completely devastatingly alone. His wife, Susan, died giving birth to their twins 6 weeks ago. Hemorrhage is sudden, catastrophic. One moment, she was laughing, telling him she couldn't wait to meet their babies. The next alarms were screaming, and doctors were running, and Richard was being pushed out of the room while his whole world bled out on a hospital table. They saved the twins, Tom and Scotty. 2 perfect, fragile lives that cost him the only woman he'd ever loved. Richard couldn't look at them. Not really. He provided everything. The best nursery money could buy. Custom cribs from Italy, night nurses with credentials from Johns Hopkins, and a pediatrician on call 24/7. But he couldn't hold them. Couldn't bear the way they had Susan's nose, her delicate fingers, her dark hair. Every time he looked at his children, he saw what they'd taken from him. It wasn't rational. It wasn't fair. But grief doesn't operate on logic. And Richard's grief was eating him alive from the inside out. So, he hired people, paid them extremely well to do the things he couldn't. The night nurses worked in shifts around the clock. The pediatrician came twice weekly for wellness checks. The house staff maintained the nursery with military precision, and Richard stayed in his office, building companies and making billions, and pretending that money could substitute for the presence his children needed. He told himself they were fine. They had everything: professional care, medical supervision, and every advantage. What did it matter if their father couldn't bear to be in the same room for more than 5 minutes? They were too young to know the difference. That's what he told himself. That's the lie he lived inside. Then Camila Rodriguez walked into his home, and everything he'd built on that lie began to crumble. She was 53, Panam, with warm brown eyes and hands that had worked hard for every dollar she'd ever earned. She came to clean 3 times a week, dust the furniture, mop the floors, and change the linens. Simple work that paid enough to send money back to her daughter and 3 grandchildren in Panama City. Camila didn't expect to love the babies. She was hired to clean, not to care. But the first time she walked past the nursery and heard one of the twins crying, something in her chest pulled tight. She stopped at the doorway. The night nurse sat in the corner, scrolling through her phone, earbuds in. The baby, Tom, screamed in his crib. His face was red, his small fists clenched, his whole body rigid with distress. The nurse didn't move. Camila stood there for 30 seconds, waiting for the professional to do her job. Nothing. She cleared her throat. The nurse looked up, annoyed, and pulled out one earbud. What? Camila kept her voice respectful. The baby's crying. He does that. He'll settle. How long has he been crying? The nurse's eyes narrowed. Are you questioning how I do my job? Camila wasn't trying to cause problems. She needed this position. The money was better than anything she'd earned in 15 years of cleaning houses. But that baby's cry was drilling into her skull, activating something primal and undeniable. I just thought, you're the maid. I'm the nurse. I'll handle the children. The nurse put her earbud back in, returned to her phone. Camila stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at her to walk into that room, pick up that baby, and hold him until the crying stopped. But she wasn't his mother, wasn't his nurse, wasn't anything except a woman paid to clean floors. She walked away, but that cry followed her through the entire house, into her dreams that night, into her prayers the next morning. The second time, it was worse. Camila arrived for her Thursday shift and heard both twins crying. Not the healthy cry of babies who needed feeding or changing. A weaker cry, tired, like they'd been at it for hours and were running out of strength. She found a different nurse this time, younger. The woman was preparing bottles with precise mechanical movements, ignoring the wails coming from the nursery. "Excuse me," Camila said carefully. "Are the babies okay?" The nurse didn't look up. "They're colicky. It's normal. Both of them are twins, often sync up. It's documented." The nurse finished preparing the bottles and walked toward the nursery. Camila followed at a distance, watching through the doorway. The nurse fed them efficiently, burped them correctly, changed their diapers with practice speed, everything by the book, everything technically perfect, but there was no warmth, no soft words, no gentle rocking. The babies were processed like items on an assembly line, fed, changed, and returned to their cribs. The nurse washed her hands, checked her watch, and returned to her phone. Camila's heart broke. These children had every material advantage, but they were starving for something money couldn't buy. Human warmth, connection, love. She finished her cleaning and left. But she couldn't stop thinking about those babies, about their weak cries, about the way they lay so still in their cribs, like they'd learned crying didn't bring comfort, so why waste the energy? That night, Camila called her daughter, Luisa, in Panama. "Mommy, you sound sad. What's wrong?" Camila told her about the babies, about the nurses who followed protocols but didn't hold them, about the father who provided everything except himself. "They're dying, Luisa, not in their bodies yet, but in their spirits. Babies need love to survive. Without it, they fade." Luisa was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. It's not my place, isn't it?" Luisa's voice was gentle. "Didn't you always teach me that when God puts a need in front of us, we become responsible for it, whether we want to be or not?" Camila closed her eyes. Her daughter was right. But this wasn't Panama, where neighbors looked after each other's children without question. This was New York. This was a billionaire's home. There were boundaries, hierarchies, and rules she couldn't break without consequences. "If I interfere, I'll lose this job, Luisa. We need this money." "I know, Mommy. I know." Her daughter paused. "But can you live with yourself if you do nothing and something happens to those babies?" Camila didn't sleep that night. She lay awake praying, arguing with God, asking why he'd put her in this impossible position. Why show her suffering she wasn't allowed to ease? Why break her heart for children who weren't hers to save? Don't forget, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we're brave enough to do the right thing, even when it costs us everything. Stay with me. The next week, Camila started breaking small rules. She'd arrive early before her shift officially started and spend 10 extra minutes in the nursery. When the nurses were changing shifts, those chaotic 15 minutes of overlap and distraction, Camila would slip in. She'd pick up whichever twin was crying and just hold them. No agenda, no expertise, just a grandmother's arms and a heart that couldn't walk past suffering. The babies responded. Tom would calm almost immediately, his small body relaxing against her chest. Scotty would stop whimpering and stare up at Camila's face with those dark, serious eyes that looked exactly like her dead mother's. Camila sang to them soft Spanish lullabies her own mother had sung to her 50 years ago in the mountains of Panama. She didn't care that they couldn't understand the words. Music isn't about translation. It's about tone, about the vibration of love transmitted through sound. The twins felt it. She could tell. They'd go still and quiet, listening, their tiny faces peaceful for the first time since she'd started working in this house. But Camila noticed something else. Something that worried her more than the crying, more than the emotional neglect. The diapers. They were too light, too dry. Camila had changed thousands of diapers across 6 children and dozens of grandchildren. She knew what normal looked like. Babies peed constantly. Every feeding produced wet diapers. It was biology. It was healthy. It was how you knew their kidneys worked and their bodies processed nutrition correctly. But Tom and Scotty weren't producing enough. Sometimes Camila would check the diaper after the nurse changed it and find it barely damp. Once she picked up Scotty and the diaper felt completely dry, 8 hours old according to the time written on it, and completely dry. Camila mentioned it to one of the nurses. "I think maybe the babies aren't peeing enough." The nurse smiled condescendingly. "They're fine. The pediatrician monitors their output. Everything's within normal range, but I've had 6 children, and I have a degree in neonatal care. I think I know what I'm doing." Camila backed off, but the worry grew. She started watching more carefully, counting diapers, noting the timestamps the nurses wrote on each one. The math didn't add up. Either the nurses were changing them more frequently than necessary, which seemed unlikely given how little they engaged otherwise, or the babies simply weren't producing waste. Both options terrified her. 10 days later, Camila found something that made her blood run cold. She was cleaning the bathroom attached to the nursery when she noticed the diaper pail was unusually light. She opened it. 6 diapers from the overnight shift. She checked the log the nurses kept. 12 diaper changes recorded between midnight and 8 a.m. 6 diapers. 12 changes. Camila's heart started pounding. She pulled out the diapers and examined them. Barely damp, some are completely dry. The nurses were recording changes that weren't happening. They were falsifying logs. But to cover their laziness to avoid suspicion about the baby's decreasing output or something worse. Camila's hands shook as she threw the diapers back. This was bad. This was evidence of neglect, possibly medical negligence. She should tell someone. But who? The head nurse would close ranks, protect her team. Mr. Hargrave was unreachable, drowning in his own grief. The pediatrician only came twice a week and relied entirely on the nurse's reports. Camila was just a maid. Who would believe her? More importantly, who would listen before she was fired and deported for making accusations against professionals? That night, Camila barely made it home before collapsing on her bed, sobbing. She called Louisa, "Mommy, what happened?" Through tears, Camila explained everything. The dry diapers, the false logs, the babies getting weaker instead of stronger. "They're dying, Louisa. I can see it. They're fading and nobody else notices or cares. You have to tell the father. He won't listen to me. He doesn't even look at his own children." Louisa's voice turned fierce. "Then make him look. Force him to see, because if you don't and those babies die, you'll never forgive yourself." Camila knew her daughter was right. But the thought of confronting Richard Hargrave, a billionaire who controlled empires, who had lawyers and power and could destroy her with a phone call, terrified her. She was nobody. An immigrant cleaning woman with papers that were legal but fragile. One complaint from someone like him, and she could lose everything. Her job, her visa, her ability to support her family. But 2 babies were dying, and she was the only one who saw it. Camila made a decision. Tomorrow morning, she would go to Mr. Hargrave directly. Show him the evidence. Make him understand. And if he fired her, if he had her deported, at least she'd know she tried. At least she'd be able to look God in the face and say she didn't walk away from children in need. The next morning, Camila arrived at 6 a.m. She'd been awake all night rehearsing what to say, praying for courage. She found Richard in his office, exactly where he always was, hunched over his laptop, dark circles under his eyes, looking like a man who'd forgotten what sleep felt like. Camila knocked softly on the open door. He didn't look up. "Whatever it is, tell Louisa I'm busy." "Mr. Hargrave, it's about the babies. The nurses handle the babies." His voice was flat, dismissive. "Sir, please. I need you to listen." Something in her tone made him look up. He seemed surprised to see her standing there. Camila realized he probably didn't even know her name. "I'm Camila. I clean your home. I know who you are. He didn't. Sir, something is wrong with Tom and Scotty. Richard's expression hardened. The pediatrician was here 3 days ago. They're fine. They're not fine, sir. Please, I need to show you something. Richard's jaw clenched. I don't have time for. Your babies are dying. The words came out harder than Camilla intended, but they landed. Richard went completely still. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then he stood slowly, his face dangerous. What did you just say? Camilla's courage nearly failed. But she thought of those weak cries, those dried diapers, those fading babies, and she pushed forward. Come with me. Please, just look at them. Richard followed her to the nursery, his footsteps heavy with anger. The night nurse was gone. The day nurse hadn't arrived yet. The babies lay in their cribs, so small, so still to... Camilla walked to Tom's crib and lifted him gently. She felt his diaper completely dry. She checked the time stamp. 12 hours old. When was the last time your son urinated, Mr. Hargrave? Richard stared at her like she'd spoken another language. I don't. That's not. The nurses track that. The nurses are lying. Camilla's voice was steady now. She pulled out her phone, showed him the photos she'd taken of the diaper log and the nearly empty diaper pail. They record diaper changes that don't happen. They write down output that doesn't exist. Your babies aren't producing waste because they're shutting down. Richard's face went white. That's impossible. Dr. Adler examined them. She said what the nurses told her. She doesn't see them every day. I do. Camilla's eyes filled with tears. Sir, I know you're grieving. I know looking at them hurts because they remind you of her, but they're dying because nobody's paying attention. The nurses do the minimum. The doctor trusts their reports, and you're not here. Richard grabbed the phone from her hand and stared at the photos. His mind was racing, connecting dots he'd deliberately ignored. The pediatrician's visits were brief. She relied on the nurse's documentation. He'd signed off on hiring the highest-rated agency without vetting individual nurses. He'd assumed expensive meant competent. He'd let money substitute for oversight because oversight required presence, and presence required seeing his children's faces, Susan's face. Camilla watched realization destroy him in real time. What do I do? His voice cracked completely. What do I do? You call Dr. Adler right now. You have her come immediately. You get your babies to a hospital. Camilla's voice was firm, almost commanding. And then, sir, you start being their father. Richard pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Made the call. Dr. Adler arrived within 40 minutes. Her face went from professional calm to barely concealed panic as she examined the twins. She checked their diapers, their skin tur, their fontanelles, and their vital signs. When she looked up at Richard, her expression was grave. Mr. Hargrave, these babies are severely dehydrated. They're in the early stages of kidney failure. The room tilted. Richard grabbed the edge of the crib to stay upright. How is that possible? They've been fed. I've seen the nurses. They've been fed, but they're not absorbing properly. It could be pyloric stenosis, a blockage preventing proper digestion, or a metabolic disorder. I won't know until we run tests. She was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling an ambulance. Both twins need to be hospitalized immediately. Richard couldn't breathe. His children were dying. Had been dying right under his nose while he sat in his office building empires and avoiding pain. While nurses he'd never properly screened falsified documents while he'd let grief blind him to the fact that his babies needed him more than his companies did. Camilla stood quietly in the corner, tears streaming down her face, praying under her breath. The ambulances arrived. Paramedics moved with controlled urgency, hooking up IVs, loading the twins onto tiny gurneys. Scotty started crying weakly as they inserted her fore. The sound cut through Richard like glass. He moved toward her without thinking, touched her small hand. Her fingers wrapped around his thumb instinctively, and Richard broke. 3 years of building walls, 6 weeks of deliberate emotional absence. It all shattered in that moment. He climbed into the ambulance with his daughter, holding her hand, finally looking at her face. Really? Looking. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry, baby girl. Daddy's here now. Daddy's here. The paramedics started to object to his presence, but something in Richard's face stopped him. They rode to the hospital in silence, except for the beeping monitors and Richard's whispered apologies. At the hospital, tests revealed the diagnosis, pyloric stenosis. Both twins. A narrowing of the opening between the stomach and small intestine. It prevented proper feeding, caused projectile vomiting, led to dehydration, and eventually kidney failure if untreated. Easily fixable with surgery, but deadly if missed. How long has this been developing? Richard asked the surgeon. Likely since week 3 or 4. The symptoms are subtle at first. Increased fussiness, inadequate weight gain, and decreased urine output, but they progressed quickly. Richard's blood ran cold. Week 3 or 4, right when he'd hired the nurses and stopped checking on his children himself, right when he decided money could buy him distance from his pain, the nurses should have noticed. The surgeon's expression was carefully neutral. Nurses rely on training and observation. If they weren't properly trained or weren't observing closely, yes, they'd miss it. And the pediatrician should have caught it at the weekly checkups. But if the nurse's logs indicated everything was normal and the babies weren't displaying symptoms during the brief examination, the surgeon paused. Mr. Hargrave, this wasn't inevitable, but it was a perfect storm of inadequate oversight. Richard wanted to rage, wanted to sue the nursing agency, file complaints against Dr. Sean, destroy everyone who'd failed his children. But underneath the anger was a truth he couldn't escape. The person who'd failed the most was him. He'd hired people he'd never properly vetted. He'd trusted credentials over instincts. He'd let grief make him absent. And his children had nearly paid with their lives. The only person who'd noticed, who'd cared enough to risk everything to speak up, was the woman he'd never bothered to learn the name of until today. The surgeries were scheduled for the next morning. Both twins would undergo the procedure within an hour of each other. The surgeon assured Richard that it was routine, low risk, high success rate. But Richard couldn't stop shaking. He sat between their hospital cribs all night, a hand on each baby, feeling their small chests rise and fall. Scotty, Tom, his children, and Susan's children. At 3 a.m., he finally broke down completely, pressed his forehead against Tom's crib and sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I let her death make me abandon you. You deserve better. You deserve so much better." A soft hand touched his shoulder. Richard looked up. Camila stood there in the dim hospital room. She wasn't supposed to be there. Visiting hours had ended long ago, but somehow she'd talked her way in. "They're going to be okay, Mr. Hargrave." Her voice was gentle. "God is merciful. They'll be okay." Richard stood, faced her. This woman who'd saved his children's lives. This woman he dismissed as just the maid. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You risked everything. Your job. Some things are worth the risk." Richard's voice broke. "I was killing them. My grief was killing them." Camila took his hand. Small, callous, strong. "Grief makes us do terrible things, sir. It makes us build walls when we should be building bridges. But you're here now. That's what matters. You're here because you forced me to see. Because God used me to open your eyes." She squeezed his hand. "Those babies need their father. Not your money. Not the professionals you hire. You, the man who loves them, even though looking at them breaks your heart." Richard looked at his sleeping twins. "They look just like her. I know. Every time I see them, I see what I lost." "Then look longer," Camila said softly, "until you also see what you still have." The words penetrated something deep. Richard had been looking at his children as evidence of loss. But they weren't just reminders of Susan's death. They were proof of her life. Living, breathing pieces of the woman he'd loved, not replacements for her, but extensions of her. Her laugh would live in their laughter. Her kindness would live in their hearts if he taught them. Her love would live forever if he gave them what she would have given them himself. The surgeries went perfectly. Both twins recovered quickly. Within 3 days, they were eating normally, producing wet diapers, gaining weight, and becoming the healthy babies they should have been all along. Richard never left the hospital. He learned to change diapers, learned to prepare bottles at the exact right temperature, learned which cry meant hunger, and which meant hold me. Camila visited every day after her shift. She taught Richard her lullabies, showed him how to burp them properly, sat with him during the long nights when fear crept in, and whispered that he wasn't enough. "You're their father," she'd say. "You're exactly enough." When the twins were finally cleared to go home, Richard did something that surprised everyone. He fired every nurse, terminated his contract with Dr. Adler. He would hire a new pediatrician, one who made house calls daily and actually examined his children thoroughly. But he wasn't hiring live-in nurses anymore. He was going to be the primary caregiver. He'd arrange his work schedule around them, take meetings from home, bring them to the office when necessary, whatever it took. They weren't going to grow up thinking their father loved his companies more than he loved them. And Camila Richard offered her a new position. Not maid, not even nanny. "Family, I want you to help me raise them, not as an employee, but as their grandmother. Because that's what you've been." Camila's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I can't accept." "Please." Richard's voice cracked. "You saved them. You saw them when I was too blind. You loved them when I was too broken. They need you. I need you." Camila looked at the twins, sleeping peacefully in their car seats, ready to go home. She thought about her own grandchildren in Panama, the ones she missed desperately. She thought about the money she sent back, the practical reasons she'd taken this job. But she also thought about Tom and Scotty, about the way they calmed when she sang about the responsibility God had placed in her path. "I'll stay," she said quietly. For them, Richard pulled her into a hug. "Unprofessional, inappropriate, necessary. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on my children when I had." They brought the twins home. The mansion that had been a mausoleum of grief began to transform. Richard moved his office to the room next to the nursery. He worked with doors open so he could hear them. He took breaks every 2 hours to hold them, feed them, and simply be present. Camila lived in a suite on the same floor. She cooked meals that reminded her of home and taught Richard Spanish words. Amore, familia, esperanza, love, family, hope. The babies thrived. By 8 weeks post-surgery, they'd caught up on all their developmental milestones. By 3 months, they were smiling, laughing, and reaching for their father's face. Richard took pictures constantly, not to post on social media or send to relatives, just to remember, to prove to himself that this was real, that he hadn't lost everything, that grief hadn't won. One evening, he found Camila in the nursery rocking Scotty and humming. "Can I ask you something?" Camila looked up. "Of course. Why did you risk everything? You could have looked the other way. Kept your job, protected yourself." Camila was quiet for a moment. "When I was young, my son was sick. Very sick. We had no money for doctors. I cleaned houses, but it wasn't enough. I prayed God would send help." She stroked Scotty's hair. "A wealthy woman in our village heard about my son. She paid for everything. His treatment, his medicine. She saved his life." Asked her why. Why help us when we were nobody to her? Camila smiled softly. She said, "God doesn't give us resources so we can hoard them. He gives them to us so we can be His hands in the world." She had money. I had a need. That made her responsible. Richard's throat tightened. "Your son is he. He died anyway." 5 years later, a different illness. Camila's eyes glistened. But those 5 extra years were a gift. I got to watch him grow. Got to hear him laugh. Got to tell him I loved him one more time. She looked down at Scotty. These babies deserved someone to fight for them. God put me in their path. That made me responsible. Richard sat down beside her. "I was so angry at God for taking Susan for leaving me alone." "You weren't alone. You just couldn't see through the pain. Camilla transferred Scotty to his arms. Grief is like a fog, Mr. Hargrave. It makes everything disappear. But the things you love are still there. You just have to wait for the fog to clear. Richard held his daughter close, breathed in her baby smell, felt her small heart beating against his chest. I almost lost them. But you didn't. Camilla's voice was firm. You found them. You came back. That's what matters. 6 months later, the house was unrecognizable. Not because of renovations or new furniture, but because of sound. Babies laughing. Richard singing off-key lullabies. Camilla's voice telling stories in Spanish while the twins played on the floor. Music is playing during dinner. Joy was living in rooms that had forgotten what joy sounded like. Richard had scaled back his business commitments dramatically. He still worked, still ran his companies, but from home. His office hours were limited. His weekends were sacred. And his twins were the center of his universe in a way he'd never imagined possible 6 months ago. One Sunday morning, Richard woke to find Camilla in the kitchen making breakfast. He picked up Tom, who'd started crawling last week and was already trying to pull himself up on furniture. Camilla, I need to tell you something. She looked up from the stove. You look serious. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That's what I need to say. Richard bounced Tom gently. You saved my family, but you also saved me. I was drowning in grief, and you threw me a lifeline. I don't know how to repay that. Camilla walked over, touched his face gently. You repay it by being the father these children deserve. By showing them every day that they're loved, by teaching them that people matter more than money. That presence is the only gift that counts. She smiled. You're already doing it, Mr. Hargrave. You don't owe me anything. Richard, please call me Richard. Camilla nodded. Richard. He looked down at his son. This small miracle, who'd almost slipped away because Richard had been too broken to see him. Susan would have loved you. Camilla's eyes filled. I wish I could have known her. She was like you. Richard's voice was soft. She saw people. Really saw them. She didn't care about status or wealth or power. She cared about hearts. He looked up. She would have trusted you with our children instantly. She would have known what I was too blind to see, that sometimes God sends angels disguised as housekeepers. Camilla laughed, wiped her eyes. I'm no angel. I'm just a woman who couldn't walk past suffering. That's what angels do. They show up when we need them most. The twins turned 1 year old on a bright April morning. Richard threw a small party, just Camilla, her daughter, Luisa, who'd flown in from Panama, and a few close friends. No elaborate production, no event planners, just people who loved these children celebrating their survival. Richard watched Scotty take her first unsteady steps. Watched Tom clap his hands with delight. Watched Camilla beam with pride like the grandmother she'd become. And he felt Susan's presence. Not as absence anymore, not as pain, as a blessing. She'd given him these children, this second chance, this life. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Richard sat in the nursery watching his twins sleep. He thought about the moment Camilla had walked into his office and told him his babies were dying. How angry he'd been, how defensive, how close he'd come to firing her, and never knowing the truth until it was too late. He thought about the choice she'd made. To risk everything, her job, her income, her security, all to save 2 babies who weren't hers. That was love. Not the easy kind. The hard kind. The kind that costs everything and gives. Richard pulled out his phone and opened a voice memo. Scotty, Tom, you're asleep right now, but someday you'll listen to this. Someday you'll want to know the story of how you survived. He paused, choosing words carefully. Your mother died bringing you into this world. That's a pain I still carry. But you almost died leaving it. And the person who saved you wasn't your father. It was a woman named Camila Rodriguez, a maid I'd never bothered to see. His voice cracked. She saw you when I couldn't. She loved you when I was too broken. She risked everything to give you a future. And she taught me that being a father isn't about providing. It's about being present. He looked at their sleeping faces. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the second chance she gave me. Trying to be the father you deserve, the father your mother would have wanted you to have. Richard turned off the recording, stood, and kissed each baby's forehead. Then he walked to Camilla's room and knocked softly. She answered, concerned. Is everything okay? Richard handed her an envelope. What's this? Open it. Inside was a check, more money than Camilla would earn in 5 years. And a letter she read through tears. It offered her permanent residency in his home, a salary that would support her entire family, health care, and education funds for her grandchildren. But more than that, it offered her what she'd given his children. Family? You don't have to. Camilla started. I want to. Richard interrupted. You're not an employee anymore, Camilla. You're family. You're the grandmother my children need. The wisdom I need, the heart this house needs. He smiled. And I'm not taking no for an answer. Camilla pulled him into a hug. This man who'd been so broken 6 months ago. This father who'd almost lost everything because grief had blinded him. This human who'd finally learned that the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They can only be given by people brave enough to love without conditions. The years that followed were good. Hard sometimes because raising children is always hard, but good. Tom and Scotty grew up knowing their father's voice, his laugh, his presence. They grew up with Camilla's lullabies and stories, and unconditional love. They grew up in a home that had learned grief doesn't have to be the end. That sometimes, if you're brave enough to let people in, sorrow transforms into something beautiful. Richard never remarried. Some kind of love is once in a lifetime. But he built a family anyway, not the one he'd planned, but something different, something forged in crisis and cemented in gratitude. Camilla's daughter and grandchildren eventually moved to New York. Richard helped with visas, with housing, with jobs, because family helps family, because the woman who'd saved his children deserved to have her own family close. And the twins, they grew up knowing they'd been saved. Not just medically, but spiritually. Their father told them the story every year on their birthday. How Camilla had risked everything. How she'd refused to look away when looking away would have been easier. How love sometimes comes from unexpected places. How the people who save us aren't always the ones we expect. Scotty became a doctor. She said it was because she wanted to save babies the way she'd been saved. Tom became a teacher. He said it was because Camilla had taught him that wisdom doesn't come from degrees. It comes from hearts willing to see suffering and step toward it instead of away. And Richard, he built a different kind of empire, not of companies and profits, but of presence. He was there for every school play, every scraped knee, every midnight fear, every morning joy. He was the father grief had almost stolen. The father Camilla had helped him become. On the twins' 18th birthday, Richard gathered everyone in the living room. Camilla, now 71, is still living in the suite upstairs. Louisa and her family, close friends who'd become chosen family. I want to tell you all something. Richard said, 18 years ago, I almost lost everything. Not because of tragedy, because of my response to tragedy. He looked at Camilla. This woman saved my children's lives. But she did something more important. She saved mine. She reminded me that presence is the only currency that matters. That love requires risk. That sometimes the most important thing we can do is refuse to look away from suffering, even when everyone else has. Richard's voice broke. Camilla, you taught me how to be a father. You taught my children what unconditional love looks like. You've been the foundation of this family for 18 years. And I want you to know you'll never be forgotten. Your courage, your compassion, your choice to risk everything for 2 babies who weren't yours. That's the legacy we'll carry forever. Camilla stood, walked to him, and took his face in her aged hands. You gave me a family when mine was far away. Richard, you gave my life purpose when I thought I was just surviving. We saved each other. Scotty and Tom wrapped their arms around both of them. For people bound not by blood, but by something stronger: choice, sacrifice, love that had cost everything and given back more. The house that had been a tomb of grief had become a temple of second chances. Because one woman refused to stay silent. Because she saw 2 babies dying and decided her comfort mattered less than their survival. Because sometimes the most extraordinary heroism looks like an ordinary person doing the hard right thing when the easy wrong thing would cost them nothing. That's the story of what the maid found in the twins' diapers. Not just medical evidence, but a truth the world forgets too easily. That we're all responsible for each other. That looking away is a choice. That love doesn't ask permission or wait for credentials. It just shows up, risks everything, and saves the world one small act of courage at a time. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more emotional, dramatic, and unforgettable stories. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and keep watching.